Hello and welcome to Positive Leadership, the podcast that helps you grow as an individual, a leader, and a global citizen. Today's guest is a pioneering social entrepreneur, impact investor, and advocate for women's empowerment. Born and raised in Bangladesh, she has dedicated her life to redefining finance as a force for good. As the founder and CEO of IIX, Impact Investment Exchange, she has paved the way for the world's first social stock exchange, launched groundbreaking financial instruments like the Women's Livelihood Bond, and empowered millions of underserved people across the globe. Her work has transformed how we view capital markets, gender equality, and sustainable investing. She's also the author of The Defiant Optimist, where she shares her vision for reinventing finance and fighting global inequality. It's really an honor to welcome you, Professor Durreen Shahnaz, to the show. Durreen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Jean-Philippe, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation.
So, Doreen, let's just start by exploring your roots, if you don't mind. Something I love to do is all my guests. Could you share a bit about your early life in Bangladesh, your childhood, your family backgrounds, and some of the values that were shaped at the time?
Sure. So, I was born in Bangladesh, and this is the time when Bangladesh was part of Pakistan. So, for your listeners, little history, the whole thing was India. And then when the British left, made a bit of a mess, as you know, if you know your history, and basically divided up the country as India and then East and West Pakistan. And so basically, where I was born, which is Bangladesh today, was at that time East Pakistan, and grew up in a family, a traditional family, middle class family. My father was in the government, and basically he spoke up against the West Pakistan government, who were, basically ruling us, and that was, quite a traumatic period for the family for what he was made to go through because of that. And then also the fact that I was born in a culture where socially, religiously, women were and still are not treated as equal citizens. So this was something that shaped me from the get go. And if again, if your listeners pick up my book, The Defiant Optimist, as you'll see, I talk about it quite extensively there. I was the fourth girl in a family, again, in a culture that doesn't really give a lot of value to having girls. And my mom got a lot of pressure when I was born from every direction, including my father's family, who basically, told her they were going to marry my father off again and all that. So throughout my life, this is something that stayed with me because my mom would always, I think for her it was just something that she never recovered from. That I was the fourth girl, and this was something, again. She didn't do it intentionally, but she would say it so much, including on my birthdays, that it really sort of almost in a way defined me. That here I was of a gender that was not welcomed in our culture. And for me, it almost became a part of me, this fierce sort of determination that I'm going to make myself be important, in a way that I can actually change this whole mindset. So I think this, again, we are, as you're right, Jean-Philippe, we are defined by our childhood. So I think this sort of really stayed with me. And also the fact that when I grew up in the country, and it's always interesting, I always tell people, I thought we were middle class. Then I realized we are actually not even middle class. We were quite poor. Because it was a country that was poor to start because all the resources were going to West Pakistan, and then we had a bloody war in
Yeah.
1971, and 3 million people were killed in 9 months. So my childhood memory, a lot of it is actually from the war, and very defining memories of my childhood. And I think for me, it really was the fact that growing up in a country that was war torn. Everything was destroyed. And growing up kind of post war, that's when I went to school. There was a huge national fervor. Everything, English was taken away.
Yeah.
Curriculum, everything was in Bengali, which is our mother tongue. And it was really quite something to grow up in that whole era, and be able to sort of, in some ways, I always said it's the country, as the country was going through its own struggle. I
Hmm.
could, as a child, I was going through my own struggle to find my place. So the country was trying to find its place in the world platform. I was trying to find my place, in the country, in the society, in the family. So I
Yeah.
think, again, it was interesting times, and I probably wouldn't be here today if I didn't have that background.
Yeah. If you can, Doreen, I think it would be interesting for listeners if you could share maybe one of those shared memories with your sisters, your mom, your dad,
Mhm.
because I understand that in that very tough environment of war, post-war, and famine as well, your family deeply believed in helping others. I think it was a big sense of solidarity that you shared in some other podcasts. Would you mind sharing maybe one of such stories?
Sure, sure. So I think, one of the big thing was, for us, and I think this is, again, sort of the where the religion played a role as well, and I would say the culture. Um, there was a big sense of public service. There's a big sense of giving, and this was very much a part of the family, even if we didn't have much.
Yeah.
So for us, Fridays were the days when we would actually get. Um, there's a whole system of ration. Like, we would actually have these ration cards, where you would get
Hmm.
rice, and I believe like oil, and wheat, that you would actually get these are, I guess, the basic, I guess, food
Yeah.
commodities, and we would get it at a lower price from the government store. And people would have ration cards, but if you didn't have an ID, you don't have ration cards. And you know again, country where 80% of the people at that point was illiterate. I mean, how would anyone have ID cards even, right?
Hmm.
Um so I remember my grandmother and my mother, for them the big thing was, listen, we can get this, but there are people who just don't even have this, right? This
Right.
subsidized food. So Fridays were the days when we would actually give the wheat and some the rice, and we would like share it with people who would line up outside, and we would just and we would take turns among the kids, where we would actually give a cup of rice to people, and each time, you would actually, they would say a prayer for you, and so it was almost seen as
Hmm.
something that you're not kind of looking down and sort of giving them like you're someone superior, but it really was, I'm fortunate and I'm so happy that we can have this transaction because you're giving me prayers, right? And
Yeah.
that's so invaluable. And I'm giving you something which is, you know, that obviously I have that I can share, but thank you so much for those prayers. So it was really that. And it really was a very, I would say, defining kind of experience in my life. We would do this every Friday, that sense of equality,
Yeah.
the action just was very real, right? And so we
Hmm.
never saw people as, oh, they're less than us, or they're kind of, it's like we just happen to be born 10 feet away from them and
Yeah.
house, and rather than in the slum, we could easily be in that slum, so that's what my mom would always say, and which is so true. So much in life is
Hmm.
luck, and we were so lucky. um,
Yeah.
and so I think, yes, I think that sense of this passion of equality,
Yeah.
this passion of actually sharing, what we had, I think it kind of stayed with me. And I think this,
Hmm.
and all of my siblings, and I think you see, I mean, all of us, they're doing, kind of spend our life doing various public service, and in different
Hmm.
ways. And yeah, it was something very powerful.
So would you say that that sense of equality, of sharing, of generosity, but I'm sure as well that your resiliency has been much tested at the time, you and your family. Is it something that it still stay with you? I mean, since that early age, I mean, those are kind of the founding values for Doreen.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, I think the thing is, I mean, Jean-Philippe, I don't honestly, and I'm not saying this to kind of, I don't know, sound profound. I really don't see those as a sign of generosity, or even what I
Uh-huh.
do now as being generous. What I see this as basic, human right and
Yeah.
basic sort of practice. So yeah, you can call it generosity, but for me, it's like
Yeah.
this is what should everyone should be doing, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You don't have to be generous to do it. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I think in terms of resilience, I do feel that. Um, I think the big thing really was that we were always told we were so lucky, honestly, and I think that the opportunity that we got, because we were actually getting an education where 99% of the women in the country didn't get education. My own grandmother
Wow.
lived with our maternal grandparents because my dad's salary had to be sent to his family, so
Yep.
we didn't have enough to stay on our own. And even my maternal grandmother and paternal grandmother, both of them, they were illiterate,
Hmm.
um, and both of them were married off at 11. And you know I, I would just, and I didn't have to even look too far, right? These are my family members. I had aunts, and who, again, great aunts who were
Yep.
illiterate. So I think for me it was like, wow, I'm getting this education and I'm getting this exposure. Isn't that amazing? And so for us, I think the big thing was, the other thing that I think that was very important in our family was books. So while
Hmm.
we did not have much, I remember my dad, when he would go for his trips overseas, or um, and again, foreign exchange, everything was pretty crazy, right? That he would actually always bring back books.
Hmm.
So for us, it was really the world that we saw through books. So I learned English at home. I learned, my mom could speak quite a few languages growing up, and she spoke French and this and that.
Hmm.
So we got exposed to all of that, but again, through books. So I think for us, books was the big thing as well. Um, and I think that also is very important, and I see how that shaped me, because I never approach anything without really knowing a lot about it and researching it.
Yep.
And again, it's just sort of that practice, right, from childhood. So yeah.
It's very interesting to hear you, Doreen, talk about books and reading. Actually, one of my last guests, called James Chan, is a well-known philanthropist living in Singapore today, but he was born actually in Hong Kong, then traveled the world in Africa, in the US, in UK, many other places in the world. And his family foundation, has done a ton for reading, and now he's doing a ton for eyes, actually, for vision, for people who cannot see. So anyway, it's a common thread I had with many of my guests on the power of the books, of reading and literacy. So I'd like to follow up on that and discuss the way, at some point, I think at 17, you had this amazing opportunity, I guess, for a girl in Bangladesh to go and study in a Smith Women College in the US. How did that happen? And what was it like moving from Bangladesh to the US? Must have been a huge revolution, change for you. And how did you adapt and adjust, of course, to the American way of life as a female teenager?
Right. Well, the thing is, Jean-Philippe, I actually had a stepping stone. So it was
Uh
not
huh.
directly from Bangladesh,
Yeah.
to the US. So, again, just, as luck would have it, after I finished my ninth grade, so I guess I was 14, um, 14 or 15. And my dad got a job with the Asian Development Bank in the Philippines.
Hmm.
So I actually went and the family moved there, and I spent my high school years in the Philippines, and that was a big change for me. Um, and I'll tell you, okay, it's a funny story. So I still remember when I went to a girls' school. I went to a girls' Catholic school in Bangladesh, run by
Yep.
Catholic nuns from the U.S., from England, etc. And then again, so for me, that was an English school, but when I went to school, it turned Bengali because everything was in Bengali. So I barely knew English as well, right? So I mean, the English I knew, I learned basically at home, and my mom was very strict about it, that we all had to at least speak English. And so when I went to the Philippines, you have to imagine my English is not very good. And my parents were looking for, again, a girls' school. There were plenty of girls' schools in the Philippines, but we had to speak Tagalog, which of course was not going to happen. So they had no choice but to put us in the international school, which was there.
Cross.
Yeah, and which was an American school.
Hmm.
And this was this one scene which I think of when I think of high school. I will this defines kind of our family and my experience. So there I was with my parents walking in this high school, and we're going to the hallway, and first of all I'm seeing boys, right, of course, which I didn't
Yeah.
really, and basically there was a kid and a boy and a girl. They were kissing, okay, in the hallway. And you have to understand, okay, so let me just give you some context.
Yeah.
We had TV only, like, we got TV in the house. I don't even remember. I guess, yeah, when I was little, like 5, 6 years old. But
Hmm.
it was black and white. There was one channel,
Hmm.
and it was only for 6 hours. And if they showed any Western show there, they basically censored everything. So you
Cross.
had no
Hmm.
idea what was going on, right? Because they censored all the kisses, everything.
Yeah.
So so for me, a kiss really has been only what I read in the book. Okay. And I
Yeah.
saw two people kissing, and I like stopped walking, and I was like, wow,
Shocked.
yeah, this is how it happens. Right. And because my parents, I mean, they don't even sit next to each other, right? Like, you won't even know people are married to each other, because the
Yeah.
men sit in one room, the women sit in another room, and and they just there's no
Yeah.
interaction. Like, babies come from the cloud, right? So the angel comes and drops the baby,
Yeah.
so I was like, wow. And my parents literally were like, okay, we're not going to this school. So they literally told her, and then we just left. And then they looked around. Of course, they couldn't find it, and they had to put me in that school.
Okay.
And so you can imagine, for me, coming from Bangladesh into this
Yeah.
American setup. And I remember, for me, it became this, and the kids made so much fun of me, right?
Hmm.
Because like, they would ask a question, the teacher, and I would stand up to answer.
Yeah.
And then they would all, like, start laughing, and I was not cool because we had uniform back home, and
Yes. Yeah.
I just didn't have clothes, right? So I remember my mom, like, bought me, because there's no uniform at the American school. So I
Yeah.
had one pair of jeans, like two of my dad's old shirts, and I think one skirt and a top. And that was it. That was my wardrobe. And I remember the girls would make so much fun of me, right? Everyone would just, I was just not cool.
Yeah.
And I think that also sort of made me realize that the only thing I have that these people didn't have was my drive to work hard and actually just,
Right.
smart them. And that's what I did. I mean, I would literally, you know, those Reader's Digest, like,
Yeah.
increase
Yeah.
your word power. Remember that page?
Remember that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I actually would sit there, memorize it in the morning, and come back at night and basically test myself. So this is
Hmm.
how I increase my vocabulary.
Wow.
And my determination was, by senior year, I'm going to become one of the editors of the newspaper, and which I did.
You
So
did.
I think, again, like, I knew I couldn't
Hmm.
be cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Forget that. My mom's they're not going to buy me clothes or makeup or anything. So if I'm going to be a nerdy kid, might as well be a intense nerdy kid, and
Yeah.
which I was. And then, I saw all my classmates were applying for colleges in the
Hmm.
US.
Yep.
And honestly, Jean-Philippe, for me,
Yep.
it was one shot I had to
Hmm.
basically escape
Yeah.
my restricted life.
Hmm.
So, and I just applied, and I got scholarship, and my parents, of course, wouldn't let me go. And I somehow convinced them, because, again, I got the scholarship and I was going to
Yeah.
women's college.
So your parents
That's how
supported
I,
you at the end, right, Doreen? Sorry to interrupt you. Your parents supported you to go to the US, which is not necessarily a
yeah. So
trivial move,
basically,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but to be fair, yes, they did. They did say
Yeah.
yes. And they did kind of at the end say yes, but they made it very clear that you are on your own. Like, I was
Hmm.
on my own. So from age
Hmm.
17, I was on my own. So,
Hmm.
which meant that, you know, and I didn't have anyone in the US. So if anything happened, I was on my own. I had no safety net. And I think it's very interesting because I have two daughters now in university in the US. And yes, I mean, of course, they're there alone, but it's, but they have a lot of safety net, right? I mean, with
Right.
friends, and we, of course, we have the um, kind of the financial kind of
Yeah.
safety net as well, etc. But
Sure.
I didn't have any of that. So yes, they did allow me, but I was on my own, which is fine. I managed, but it can be scary when you're 17 and going to a country and you have no
Of
idea,
course.
you know.
So,
But
how was it again to land in the US of that time when you were 17, the Smith Women College, Doreen, and what was again the adaptation path? How did it look like, and any memory again of a moment that maybe shaped you or trigger some new, new development for you?
yeah, so just a little bit of background on that. So I ended up at Smith College, and Smith was one of the seven sisters, right? They call it. They
Hmm.
had the Ivy League schools, which were all male, and the counterpart of that were these women's colleges.
Yep.
So Smith, everyone, each one of them had a kind of a corresponding male university. So our one was Yale, so Yale and Smith. But the thing with Smith was in the 60s, it was always a little different from the other ones. In the 60s, it actually went through tremendous change as it became sort of the bastion for feminism. So you had
Uh-huh.
Gloria Steinem, you had Betty Friedan, and a lot of writers, Sylvia Plath, all these people who went to Smith.
Hmm.
So when you walk into that place, for me, it was how the world should be, honestly. It was, as a woman, you could do anything. And for me, it was so amazing. It was so amazing. It was, for me, I felt like anything is possible. And of course, it is so normal that women should be leading everything, right? So it was just, so you can imagine, it was funny because later on, my husband would always say that, you just had a very warped idea of what America was,
Yeah.
because I thought that was
Yeah.
America. Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, women run everything. So,
Yeah.
um, little did I know.
Yeah.
And I think also what was very interesting for me was that whole sense of um, responsibility, of not just of yourself, but also of your greater community. So, I got really immersed in, obviously, whatever, in the academics, but also, like the African American literature, and
Yep.
the kind of the sense of, equality, the sense of, you know inclusion, etc. And I think for me that was really remarkable. And I think what was very also interesting is my first year. That's when the whole anti-apartheid movement was happening, and
Mm.
the colleges there were riots and this and
Yep.
that, and I was very much a part of that at Smith, and it was fantastic. I really felt that this is something that is possible. You can actually make change happen, and in this case, through creating pressure from the financial markets. So that's the first time I saw that,
Hmm.
right? I didn't even know what
Yep.
financial market was, right?
Yeah.
So for me, this was incredible. And I think Smith had, 50, 60 million, something like that, invested in
Hmm.
various companies which were operating in South Africa, and basically getting them to divest, and, taking over the university administration building and all of that. So yes, I was in the forefront of this. Um,
Huh.
and it was fantastic. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And it almost sort of, for me, I think probably, if you when I think back, I mean, maybe that was sort of where the seeds were sown, in terms
Yeah.
of realizing how the financial markets can play a role, an incredible role, in making social change happen.
Yeah. It looks like, Doreen, listening to you, your story, which is pretty incredible. You've been basically in the right place at the right time with the right people surrounding you to become who you became. It looks like almost a perfect alignment of the planets. So I need to ask you. You just mentioned actually one of the reasons you might have been interested or intrigued by the world of finance, right? Because in 1989, after graduating from Smith College, you began your career as a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley in New York, becoming the first Bangladeshi woman on Wall Street. So, what inspired you to enter the world of finance, and what was it like being a trailblazer in such a competitive industry for a female?
Yeah, so it was interesting when I after having that experience, and you have to understand, I'm just if you if when I go back, and think of myself, I literally, I mean, if you ask me what do you want to be in life, I would say I want to be a revolutionary. I want to like the whole Che Guevara, and is my idol type
Yeah.
of thing. Gloria Steinem is my idol, right? I'm going to change the world with activism and revolution. But what was interesting was again this one moment when I saw, oh my God, there's a whole world where the money is sitting, which can actually quietly create as much influence, right? And
Mm.
again, you have to understand, I didn't really know much about it. So the summer after my freshman year, I actually ended up working. I said, I'm going to try out working in a bank. So I worked the first summer in Citibank, and I still remember I went back to Manila and I worked in Citibank. And that was also the time, again, if you think about it, so much of life is luck, Jean-Philippe. You're absolutely
Mm.
right. Right place,
Yes.
right time, right? And that's also was the time when people power was happening in the Philippines.
Right.
So what I saw in front of me was again this whole movement where a dictator was overthrown. Sadly, dictator's son is back now. So
Yeah.
it tells you
Yeah.
we human have short memories. But basically, dictator was overthrown just by peaceful protest,
Mm.
right? So again, I'm in the second protest, and sort of been able to kind of see this. And then I saw the wealth in the Malacanang Palace because we went in and, once Marcos was deposed and they opened up everything. And it was mind boggling, the wealth, mind boggling. They
Mm.
had like emerald, because I believe Imelda Marcos was allergic to plants or something. And they had emerald plants all over made of jade and emeralds. Okay. It's just like you felt like you were in some, kind of dream.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, my God, there's so much of poverty in this country, and look at all this wealth, right?
Mm.
That people accumulated. So I think for me, so that's the tension always was there for me, right? So it started happening. I'm like, activism or finance.
Mm.
And again, it was again very interesting. Kind of the summers, I kind of went back and forth with the two. The next summer, I kind of went and did activism work. I went and worked in the villages in Bangladesh. Um, and but again, all of this, I feel like when I'm thinking back, all their little pieces, I think, that were coming together for me in my puzzle of life. And I think that's what it is. I think life
Mm.
is a big puzzle, right? And the journey is for us to find all these little pieces to see if they come together, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I was doing. And for me, my senior year, like the fourth year, um, I really thought I got into graduate school
Mhm.
at London School of Economics. I was going to do economics, and then the whole plan was, go back and it would be the same thing, get married, or whatever. And I just couldn't see myself doing that. And I basically said, or I'll go and work in a nonprofit. And I realized that that's not what I wanted. I actually
Mm.
wanted to kind of see where the power lies. Uh,
Right.
and I, even when I went for my interviews, I saw like there were all these, and they were basically people, they prepare for years for these interviews, right? And I had like no idea. So I just sort of went in. I had to kind of borrow my suit. I didn't even have a suit. And I borrowed a suit from a friend, and I went in for the interviews, and I had like 6 offers. And sometimes, when you don't want something badly, I think you're just more relaxed about it and you get it. Um, and I ended up taking Morgan Stanley because Morgan Stanley had what I saw there. They had the highest number of women
Ah.
managing directors when I went actually
Yep.
and I was interviewing. And again, that's not much. I think it was less than 7% or whatever, like tiny number.
Wow.
And
Mm.
most of them were from Smith.
Mm.
So, and the analyst program at Morgan Stanley was started by 6 Smith women whose fathers were all bankers there. So they basically
Ah.
said, we want to be bankers as well. So you have to kind of figure out, create a program. And that's how the whole analyst program started, taking kids right out of
Got you.
undergrad. So yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. It makes me think, Doreen, of a previous guest I had that I'm sure you may know, Indra Nui, the
Yeah,
former
yeah.
CEO of Pepsi. And Indra, in our discussion, discussed the challenges she had, of course, when moving from India to the US. She had to constantly prove herself in male-dominated spaces. And then she shared as well the way that through the education system, she learned how to debate and the way she was able to speak up and by applying the art of debating in the corporate world, and that helped us obviously super well when you can see what happened to her career. So as you said, you are the
But
first
it's
Bangladeshi
a
woman. Sorry.
Jean-Philippe, if I
Yep.
may interject, because
Yep.
it's very interesting you bring her up, because I bring her up quite a bit. So there's
Yep.
actually more dissimilarities with her than
Okay.
similarities. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
One
Yep.
is when she went to the US, and I read her book, and I met her. We were both in the Asia Society, the Advisory Council, and all that.
Yep.
When she, first of all, she's a Brahmin. Okay, so when you're born in the upper caste and from South India, you are
Right.
already seen as a privileged.
Mm.
Okay, and you have, and with the Brahmins, and if you think about it in the US, all the CEOs who are there, the Indian CEOs, they're all Brahmins.
Mm.
Okay, and it's very interesting because when you are born in a caste system, when you're born as a Brahmin, you are literally immersed in that whole sense of entitlement and the fact that you're meant to do great things and you're meant to be leading.
Mm.
Okay. Also, according to her book, which I read,
Yep.
it was very encouraged. It was expected she'll do really well. She will actually. It was never the case. Okay, so when you're born, if you were born in culture like mine, a poor Muslim country, no,
Yep.
that was not what it was. Okay. And also, I think very, very importantly, she was much older when she went to the US. She was, I think,
Right.
24, 25. I was 17.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Huge difference at that time, right? And going for your undergrad versus going for, grad school later on. Very, very different. So I think for me, it was, of course, she's someone, that I look up to, admire, but very, very different background. Um,
Got you.
I think also it's very interesting where even in her book, when I read it and I couldn't relate at all,
Mm.
is how she said everyone always liked her and always, doing things. And I'm reading this, it felt like a little bit like a CEO writing it.
Uh-huh.
And I said, were we in the same America? Because I actually faced a lot of racism and I
Mm.
actually, had to fight a lot. So
Yeah.
I think that the reality is, I think, again, perhaps, because I'm not scared to say all these, and I'm not running a Fortune 500 company,
Yeah.
but the reality is, it is very different,
Yeah.
where you come from, where your social standing is, and also, again, when you were sort of told from the get-go that you will be someone great.
Mm. No, thanks so much for bring your own perspective to the discussion, Doreen. Certainly appreciate the fact that your paths have been quite different from from Bangladesh, India to the US, given those different backgrounds and where you came from individually. I'd like to keep going and discuss the learning you had from your time at Morgan Stanley that shaped your perspective on finance and its potential for social good eventually.
Yes, no, absolutely. So I think for me, I think in Morgan Stanley, what it did was it really taught me obviously the basics, the bells and whistles, finance. It also taught me in the positive side, the importance of hard work, of dedication.
Hmm.
Taught me how to pull all nighters, which, trust me, is not easy, but I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
You figure out when you start fading, and how you have to keep up. Um, but also, what it taught me was that while people say that finance has no color or gender, it definitely does have it.
Mm.
Because I also saw how there are so few women, and we were always kind of, including me, just didn't really get the good deals. We were always sort of, we're doing the background work, we're doing
Hmm.
the things that, would get the guys ready. Um, and and I remember even in my team, I would just get there was another guy and myself, and he would just get the better deals all the time. And I think the thing was, initially I really thought, oh, okay, maybe it was, yes, I didn't have finance background, he did, and then I had to pick it up. But even after I picked it up, I realized, no, it was not that. It really was the fact that, he was one of the boys from the boys
Yeah.
club. And I remember this, I said, okay, I looked at them, I said, what, why? Like, how do I sort of become part of this? And I realized that, that whole, remember the water fountain chat,
Yeah.
again, I didn't really, I went to women's college, and
Mm.
even 4 years ago, I was not in the US. So I remember that the big thing was sports. I said, okay, I'll learn about American sports.
Mm.
And so even if I would just literally read the paper so I could actually add stuff to the conversation.
Yeah.
But I realized it is very, very, very difficult, have to overcome the obstacle of being, again, a woman, and then a woman of color, and
Yeah.
then being a foreigner, right? Um,
Yep.
so it was very tough, and I realized how, in the world of finance, again, I mean, things have changed. Of course, now there are a lot of
Mm.
people from different background, but you're talking about 35 years ago. It was
Right.
not a very welcoming place,
Yeah.
you know.
So is it the reason, Doreen, that after 2 years again in investment bank in Morgan Stanley, you decided to return to Bangladesh to work at Grameen Bank, one of the world's first microfinance institutions, which qualifies itself as the bank for the poor? Can you elaborate again on what motivated you to leave Wall Street and transition there?
You know, it was interesting. I realized that, I had the option to stay on. Okay. And
Hmm.
I realized that if I stayed on, I had to become, um, you know, I had to become one of them.
Mm.
And which meant that, it's kind of, how should I explain it? Um, it's sort of like having that look, okay, where you were wearing certain clothes, you have a certain hair, you have a
Yeah.
certain, and I literally had to sit down and decide if that's what I wanted to be.
Mm.
And that would actually mean my life would go into a trajectory of, and probably I don't know if I would make it, to be very honest, because
Yeah.
again, of my race and my gender and all of that. So for me, it really was that the only reason to go through that and take on that look and take on that um, challenge to stay on and see if anything happens would be money. Okay,
Mm.
because yes, I would make a lot of money even if I didn't go to the top. I would make a lot of money. And the thing is, Jean-Philippe, that was not enough for me.
Mm.
So money never motivated me. So it just wasn't, if it was only for money, I was like, I don't really think so. And that really became also a perfect time for me to say, okay, so I have this wonderful toolkit now. So where
Hmm.
can I go and use it? So I wanted to go back to Bangladesh. And at that time, again, people thought I was crazy. I mean, in the US, and I'm sure it's the same in Europe. I mean, once you have certain visa, you just
Mm.
don't give it up. You're
Of
just sort of
course.
like, this is your
Yeah.
thing, and you can.
Yeah.
But I just gave everything up and just went back, um, and I looked around. I had offers to work in, like, the foreign banks which were there, Standard Chartered,
Yeah.
Citibank. But I said, why? I mean, I could have worked at Morgan Stanley. You know what I mean?
Of
And
course.
it'd be the same thing. Like there'll be like all these guys who just will not listen to me, and I didn't want to do it. And then I went around and I found this small bank which was giving these loans, and no one knew Grameen. Literally,
Yeah.
no one knew Grameen at that time. Yes, the really early years. I mean, and yeah, I went and interviewed with Professor Yunus, and I
Mm.
remember he said, "You'll never make it here. You're coming back to the to Bangladesh after a long time. You will just not make
Yeah.
it." So he put me on probation,
Yeah.
sent me to the kind of the most backward of the villages.
Yeah.
Um, and I survived. And I remember it was like a
Mm.
big celebration when I got my off my probation to get my salary of $90 a month. I still remember. Um, it
So,
was, but it was again, it was one of those things which I feel that
yeah.
was a defining moment in my life, and I
Yeah.
really felt that it was the right thing, the right decision I made,
Yeah.
in the
So,
fork of my
would you
life.
mind for listeners, Doreen, give a bit of context of what Grameen Bank was all about? Myself, 20 years ago, I used to sit on the board of Positive Planet led by Jacques Attali, and Jacques Attali was very much involved in microfinance development, close friend of Professor Yunus as well, which opportunity to meet a couple of times. But would you mind telling our listeners what was the inception design of microfinance, and what did Grameen Bank accomplish at the time, and what did you learn about
Yeah.
finance as a tool for empowerment?
So basically, the thought was, usually if you think about it, the economic growth is always thought about, okay, you know, you have, you're probably coming from some background or middle class background where you kind of create a factory, you create a business, and you basically
Yeah.
create jobs, and you basically give those jobs to people. So in this case, I guess the underlying thought is, everyone can and is in some way, shape, or form, even if they
Mm,
don't know they're an entrepreneur. So everyone sort of, that's a basic human instinct,
mm,
to
mhm,
be able to buy and sell things, right? But to be able to do that, you actually need capital and you need money. And the
mm,
reality is, it's not something that, again, everyone has access to. So with Grameen Bank, what happened was, I guess Professor Yunus sort of started it, as an experiment when he came back from the US with his PhD, um, in giving loans to these women with small loans, and seeing if they would actually, without collateral, if they would pay back. But the whole structure is, you give the loan, but they have to start paying it back, little by little, and the tenure is 1 year. So they're paying back as they are making use of the money, right? So,
mm,
so you have very, very intense monitoring. You go and visit them. You actually are, and you're making sure that you're part of the whole process of growth. Now, yes, there's no collateral, but what way you can get your money back is in that model, and there are many other models that came afterwards. At Grameen, the big thing was that they what they call the group model, which is, you form a
mm,
five group of five people, five women, and basically, um, the woman who would come and ask for the loan, she would be the last one to get it, and the last one who joins is the first one to get it. And
yeah.
basically, they sort of cover each other. They all have a group fund. They put some money in there, so if anything happens, flood, whatever, they can also take money from there. So it's a what was interesting for me to see is using finance not just for financing, but also for behavioral change. So all of a
Mm,
sudden, you had these women who doesn't did you have to understand, like women just had no rights, right? So,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, they actually had money that they could actually go and buy a cow, and these are tiny loans, and then sell the
Mm,
milk and pay the loan off. And so, think of that. It's just not financing, but they're actually learning how to be disciplined about, getting money and paying it back. They're
yeah.
learning about the fact that they had to memorize these 16 decisions, we used to call them, and it was also something that all the borrowers, we would have these big meetings, and we, came up with them. So it was things like, again, the societal and behavioral change, things like you would have to promise
Mm,
that you will not take dowry for your son's wedding. And
mm,
if you have a daughter, you're not going to pay a dowry. If you have girls, you will actually also send them to school. You will plant vegetables around your house. So it's kind of, again, all those things you'll say, oh my God,
mm.
like, really? But it's really that, which is, all of this are basically those basic, societal need that just wasn't there, right? So it became a part of kind of that norm, which was, we wrapped the, kind of their loan financing around. And what
Yeah.
was so interesting for me, and I talk about this in my book quite a bit, I remember for me the most powerful moment, because I spent a lot of time in the villages, because also I was looking at things, when their branches were defaulting, what was happening, because I was working on this
Yeah.
big financing round for the bank. And I remember the biggest thing for me was, and you have to understand what I would always think about. So at that point, I was what, 23, 24, around that age.
Hmm.
And I saw women of my age who already had kids who were like 10 years old. And
Wow.
they
Yeah.
looked like they were 40, like
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
basically the life has really drained everything out of them, right?
Hmm.
The hardship, the poverty. And and I remember, like, for me the most powerful thing was at Grameen, again because we have such a high literacy rate, everything was with thumbprint, right?
Hmm.
And what at Grameen, one thing that I really was very proud of, um, we would actually make them sign their names. You have to understand, these women
Hmm.
don't know how to read and write. So we
Yeah.
would sit there on the ground with a stick and teach them how to basically sign their name.
Hmm.
And also, what was interesting was the moment a woman had a child, she was
Yeah.
no longer called by her name.
Hmm.
She was called, someone so and so's mother. So
Yeah.
for me, that was also very powerful, that you are 14 years old giving birth to a child, and all of a sudden you don't exist. You are you don't have your name anymore. So what we
Yeah.
did was, we would say, no, you have to sign your name. You don't say Fatima's ma,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you don't say your Fatima's mother, or
It's you.
Rafi's mother.
Yeah.
It's you. What's your
Yeah.
name? So
Yeah.
literally they would have to, like, they would like have this look on their face, almost of fear. My own name? Are you sure? I'm like, yeah, your name. You have to write your name. So I would write their name, and then they would actually practice it. I would like hold their hand. It's like, how you teach a child to write. Um, and then when they would actually sign their name eventually, on that piece of paper, every time these women would cry, and I would cry with them.
Yeah.
You cannot
Well,
imagine that one moment, how defining it
yeah.
is for someone's life.
Yeah, this is very powerful. Obviously, it's super inspiring, Doreen, to see the way you learn, I guess, of finance could be a catalyst for social and economic change at scale, which has been an amazing story with Grameen Bank and that microfinance world for many years, many decades. Now, a couple of months back, I read a post on your Instagram account where you published your offer letter from Grameen Bank 33 years ago.
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
you may
yes.
recall this one, signed by Professor Yunus. And you
Yeah.
said, I left Morgan Stanley and John Grameen Bank because I wholeheartedly believe in Professor Yunus' mission to create a livelihood for women in Bangladesh. I also believe that it can take Bangladesh to new heights of inclusion and equitable growth. We need to have some patience. So, from your vantage point, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for a more inclusive Bangladesh right now? Because I know it's going through many challenges. And how would you build an equitable growth if you are in charge yourself, Doreen?
Right. I'm so glad you asked that question, Jean-Philippe, because uh, my former boss is now running the country. So,
That's right.
so it is wonderful, and I'm really, really, really grateful that he and his team has given us the opportunity at IAX to actually do Bangladesh's first bond for overseas
Hmm.
market, which is going to be a $200 million orange
Hmm.
bond. So this is going to be sort of a part of a series of bringing in $1 billion into the country.
Wow.
And the whole process is going to be, and again, the orange is basically sits at the intersection of gender equality and climate action. So again, Bangladesh is a country which, of course, is impacted by climate change immensely.
Yep.
And like, it's a lot of the progress that has been made for gender equality is now going backwards. So where you have people losing land, and the first thing they're doing is selling off their daughters.
Hmm.
There are many examples of this, I mean,
Yeah.
thousands. And so for me, this is really important that we make women the agents of climate action. And that
Hmm.
means that, again, using financing to give that power. So we are in the process now. If again, hopefully everything goes well, and to be able to kind of do the first one in this series where the financing will be very much linked to ensuring that there's climate action, and then
Hmm.
also women's empowerment. So this means for example, if the financing is going to go for, say, solar panels
Yeah.
in the garment industry, well, we have to make sure all the labor laws are equitable for the women,
Yep.
takes into account their life needs, and the fact that we will actually have also women be trained, to be technicians, to be able to take care of those solar panels. Then the sort of the value chain is taken care of
Yep. Yep.
with
Yep.
women part of it. So yeah, I hope all your listeners send all their good vibes, and um, that we can actually pull this off, because I feel my life has come in a circle and I'm so lucky.
Yeah.
And this would be my kind of, I feel like this is sort of my last thing that probably I want to do, because it just is a beautiful, beautiful circle. And if I can do this, I'll be very happy. I'll die happily, as I tell everyone. So,
Come on, this is not your last undertaking, Doreen. I'm
you
sure
know,
there's going to be more, but
yeah, well,
but it's
yeah, we'll
certainly
see. Okay, we'll see. Yeah, okay.
but it's certainly a moment of truth in many ways. I think for yourself, your life, your country, Bangladesh, and as you said, coming back full circle. But before we get any further, I'd like you to unpack for our listeners what is IIX? What is this fund that you created with a mission to connect capital markets, social goods? IIX defines, I think, themselves as pioneers in impact investing, global leaders in sustainability, transforming the financial system to empower women, environment, and underserved communities in the global market. So, what is it and that you do? And what are the biggest challenges you think you can actually you can go after in a very pragmatic way in countries like Bangladesh and others in the global south?
So basically, when I started IX, now it's 16 years ago, it really was to make the financial markets inclusive. And also for me, it
Hmm.
was very important that, again, as we talked about for the last hour, all the thing, all my experiences are coming together. And I
Yeah.
think what we have done over the last 16 years is really have been able to create, various instruments, platforms, technology, etc., that has, really been able to create the right kind of interventions and products and services that has, I would say, in some ways normalize the sense of
Hmm.
inclusion. In other words, we put these big bonds every year in the market called the Women's Livelihood Bond. When we first went out in
Right.
the market, everyone thought it was crazy. They wouldn't invest because they're like, what, women? Like, what? But we normalized it by creating these really funky structures and using high finance, as I like to say, for low markets. So, what is really sort of beautiful about what we have been able to do is be able to use real finance and go beyond just sort of saying, oh, I'm putting a fund together and we'll just do investments in a few companies, but
Hmm.
really saying that we are really about not just doing little things here and there, but changing a system. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what we did. And in some ways also it was quite crazy, to be able to do something like this in in, I would say, in a region where everyone's quite risk averse.
Yeah.
So we like to, whether people will admit it or not, but I think in Asia we like to more like to copy than to actually innovate.
Hmm.
So I think this was really sort of, I can imagine it's like innovation on speed. So, and being able to sort of convince people whatever it took, um, and to make that happen, and we did.
Hmm.
So I think where we are now is we put over $500 million we've invested in the market over the years.
Hmm.
I make it sound very easy. It was really very difficult, but
I'm sure.
that's for,
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
yeah, kind of
Okay.
another day. But yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Would you mind, Doreen, I think, again, double clicking on this women's livelihood bond? I think you've been issuing already 7 bonds, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
can you walk us through an example in one of the countries? Because I think beneficiaries have been both across South Asia, but also sub-Saharan Africa. So how does it work? What does it mean to
Right.
invest as an investor $1 or a million, whatever? And
Yeah.
what kind of social economic outcomes you get in return of that? And how do you measure success? Big question for
Yes.
investors.
So basically, what we did was, so just to kind of, the premise of the bond really came from the fact that, we have this. We created a stock exchange with the Mauritian government. We also created an exchange without trading, that we run ourselves. Um, and we saw that the SMEs kept on coming back to us, for more capital. And again, the only way you can also kind of participate on that platform is you have to be working with women and climate.
Mm.
And they kept on coming back to us, to basically our network of investors and all that. So that's when I said, okay, well, why don't we actually create, again, in financial world, this is what created the 2008 financial crisis, which are the CLOs. I said, how about using that for good, where you pull together a group of
Hmm.
assets and then create layers of de-risking and then sell it to the market. So that's sort of the premise of the bond, kind of on the financial structuring side.
Yep.
And what we have done is, so you can imagine, each of these bonds every year when we are pulling them together, they're multi-country, multi-sector. So in a same bond, you have entities from India, you have entity from Kenya, you have entity from
Hmm.
Philippines, Cambodia, etc. And then you have these entities are in multi sectors. They can be from financial institutions, microfinance. They can be from agriculture, from clean energy, etc. So what are we
Yep.
doing? So we are basically in the process, creating this intense diversification on the country level, on the sector level, which actually helps in the first layer of de-risking. And then on top of that, we have two layers underneath that in the structure.
Hmm.
We have a guarantee, and then also we have a first loss. So this is
Mm.
also where we pull in various governments to play a role. The U.S. government comes in for the first loss. Like now, we have the guarantee coming from the Swedish government, and we pay them. It's not free, so it's not
Yeah.
Trump.
Yep.
Trump can't say we're, they're giving anything for free. So we're actually
Yeah.
paying the US Treasury. So
Yeah.
basically, for us, this all creates a very solid structure. And the bond actually gives, so for example, if it's $100 million bond,
Yep.
it'll have a tenure of 4 years, and the coupon payment we're giving to the investors will range
Hmm.
from I don't know, from 4 to like
Yep.
7%,
Yep.
depends on the
Yep.
market.
Depends. Yep.
And that's a good return. That's a very, very
Absolutely.
good return. So we also have a lot of, so now what has happened is the bond, as it gets getting bigger, the
Yep.
institutional investors are coming. And again,
Mm.
as you know, Jean-Philippe, they control most of the capital markets. So they're
Right.
coming and actually buying most of the bond. So they buy
Mm.
like 99% of the bond. So these big, big investors. So for them, they actually see this as something that is giving good return. They
Mm.
see this as, obviously having an impact in the markets, that they can come in indirectly. They can't come in
Yep.
directly, but they can come in through this bond. And then also they like the fact that, what we have been able to prove, which is the deeper impact you have, the financial risk goes down. And we measure
Yeah.
that impact and all of that. So, and we
W-
share it.
would you mind just giving us an example again of a country across countries, one of your first maybe bonds in terms of success and achievements? What does it mean in terms of maybe millions of lives that you've changed, women empowerment, whatever it means on the ground for the people, for the
Yeah,
real
yeah, of
economy,
course.
right, and the society? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So for example, say in the Philippines, there's an organization called Negros, for women. This is, this island called Negros, which initially their economy was based on sugar plantation. So when the price
Mm.
of sugar went down, obviously things, the whole economy collapsed. And that's when, these women started actually, getting these small loans to from this organization, to start up businesses. But again, Negros for women could not um, access financing. So that's when, say, with us, they came into our first bond, and subsequently, I think, two more times, where
Mm.
basically we provided them with the financing, which was then on lend to the women, in Negros, in this island in the Philippines. And then all of a sudden, just through that one organization, this, you know, obviously several thousand women had livelihood. And then, of course, each one of them have a family size of, you know, 6 to 8 people. They were all
Yeah.
impacted positively. So you can see like the ripple effect. Um,
Mm.
but also, very importantly, I think, so if you can imagine that across, multiple countries, and not only just microfinance, but across various other sectors, and
Yep.
the opportunity that it brings for these organizations who are basically the intermediary where through whom we work, for the last mile, um, the opportunity that they have for growth, because they can't go out in the market and actually get the financing. So this is
Yes.
a fantastic way for them. And what we have seen is over the years that this has also given them the opportunity to grow and be able to then get capital from, sort of the bigger funds like the blue orchards of the world, which are a lot of
Yep.
European funds. So what we're seeing is we're almost creating the pipeline,
Mm.
for that growth that needs to happen,
Yep.
which if you think about it, before, it really would be like something a World Bank bothered to work with, or ADB. But what we did was we just sort of completely disrupted all that,
Yeah.
um, and created, like, broke up the market, you know, and it
Yep.
has opened it up. So it's been very interesting, to be very honest, to kind of see that and being able
Yeah.
to do that.
No, I think it's a wonderful story and a wonderful example of a very successful framework you've been able to bring to life, Doreen, for the last many years. And I wish that it could inspire many other investors and funds in Western Europe as well. I must tell you, I'm someone pretty involved in impact investments as well, and where I see a lot of investments going on for environment sustainability. I see a lot more challenge when it comes to creating, designing funds for social innovation. And, we've got social issues as well, very different, of course, from the global south. So I think you've got a very well proven framework again, a blueprint. We need obviously some adjustment depending where you live in the world, but I think that could serve us well as well. So thanks for bringing that example to
Thank
life.
you, Jean-Philippe. And I hope your listeners will kind of understand the fact that we also have to stop sort of thinking in the traditional ways. So if you think about it, um, you know, it's very interesting for me that you see all these funds coming out of Europe. I'm sorry, but it's like all led by these white men. And I
Yep.
know you're one, but it's just,
I am one of
it's
them. I am
just,
one of them.
yeah, it's just sort of like, are you joking? And so they're basically coming into these market with a very,
Yeah.
you know, this attitude of, oh, we're
Mm.
coming and we're being saviors. We don't need to be saved.
Yeah.
Okay. I think what we need is equal opportunity. So that's
Yeah.
basically what I wanted to prove, that the fact that we are all as educated and if not smarter than a lot of those people who are running those funds.
For
And
sure.
the reality is, for us, we never approach any situation as the fact that we are savior. And this goes
Mhm.
back to the first story I started with, when
Right.
I would go and give, the rice to the people who didn't
Mm.
have the opportunity to get those ration cards. Again,
Yeah.
we were not doing them a favor. We were just giving them the opportunity that they should have had. So, and I
Yeah.
think that's the attitude I think we need to take, which unfortunately is still not there.
That's a great attitude. It's a very good segue into my next question, actually, Doreen, because on your Impact Investment Exchange website, you published a note on December 2019. I'm sure you see me coming, titled Is White Liberalism Taking Over Impact Investing? So you've described how caucasity shows up in impact investing, where large funds claim to do good, but keep women, people of color, and underserved communities at arm's length. So first of all, can you please explain what caucasity means? It's kind of an interesting word. And then tell us how you see impact investment evolving globally on our way to the 2030 UN SDG goals deadline. And do you believe should impact investment bridge the gap again between the global south and the powerhouses of global finance? Many questions, but I know you have a lot of passion
Yeah.
behind that theme. So go ahead.
So first of all, yeah, I think that article, I think I was mentioning to you before, Jean-Philippe, a lot of my
Yeah,
friends were not happy when I published that. Um, and the caucasity, that's not a word that I coined. It was
yeah,
actually a word that I, saw on New York Times, an op-ed piece. And the reality is, if you think about it, I wrote that now 6 years ago. Things still haven't really changed.
mm,
And the reality is the fact that I wonder, and it's very interesting because I've been thinking about this quite a bit
mm.
with all the things that are going on with Trump. I
Oh yeah,
wonder if this is going to change the playing field with Trump there, when he's like literally just destroying, all the institution and establishments. So
yeah,
again, it's sort of a little bit like, how they say that, you know, um, kind of you road to hell is paved with good intention. It's a little bit like that, which I think, and I'm being dramatic, because it really is the fact that there is a sense that you are going to, you are, if you're coming in with the thought that you are saving the people, if you're actually
hmm,
doing this to bring your ideas and your thoughts and your processes, it's a little bit like I feel like flavors of colonialism that continues.
mm,
And the interesting thing is, it was so funny when I was thinking about a couple of things. When USAID was shut down, I still remember
yeah,
when I went for graduate school, and I had, you know, I, I have too many degrees. I don't know it. I don't think I use any of them. But anyway, so one of the schools I went to where I wanted to be in this special sort of a program within that because it had some money. And this woman, the professor, she said to me, because she didn't know what Grameen Bank was, and she basically
mm,
said, it's probably one of those, rich kids bank, and if you worked at USAID, you would be part of this, but you did not, because at USAID they're doing the right kind of development work. And I
yeah,
remember telling her, really, USAID is doing the right kind of development work, and because I was giving loans to poor women, that is not development work, and she goes, absolutely not, because you're doing finance. And that stayed with me, you
mm,
know so if you think about it, so when USAID went down, I was like, it was very interesting for me, to see
mm,
this, because it
yeah,
was the same USAID, this whole Zelensky drama that happened in White House. I was
yeah,
watching that, and I had an exact same situation with people from USAID when they were barraging me because they wouldn't believe that what I was doing was actually something, you know, possible, or,
yeah,
just like very rude about the whole thing. So I
yeah,
think the thing is, I do feel perhaps in the West, there is a feeling that, you know, because the financial system is controlled by the West,
mm,
and again, a lot of the capital, of course, came from, the rest of the global South, um, the initial capital of hundreds of years ago.
yeah,
The reality is, I think that if we are actually going to have a situation where we're going to have that sense of equality and inclusion, we actually do need to have that um, ability to open up and be
mm,
financial markets, playing that role and being that inclusive, in the
yeah,
process. And I just feel, honestly,
mm,
we are just still, I mean, it's sad. I wrote that article 6 years ago and nothing has happened.
yeah,
Nothing has
yeah, and
changed.
then yeah, and you're certainly pointing to a very special time that we are going through as a world, I would say, during right now. So it brings me back actually to a great book that you wrote a few years back called The Defiant Optimist, where you argue that finance obviously must evolve to serve the greater good. So what does it mean to be a defiant optimist, and how does it mindset drive your work day by day?
Yeah, so a defiant optimist, honestly, is, I would say, it is someone who, without fear, um, makes the impossible possible. And I do,
Mm,
think one of the defining characteristics of a defiant optimist is courage. It really
mm,
does take courage, to stand up to a system that has been in place forever. It takes courage to actually share your thoughts when you know that it will actually just make you enemies. It takes courage also to be able to change things when you know that the other party is going to perceive this as something as lessening their power. So I think the thing is, again, how do you actually work around all of that and make everyone feel that the greater good is a greater, bigger pie for everyone? So I think it was really, for me, it really was that, you know what, all this is really, really tough, what we do. But you do need that defiance. And again, defiance is not a very positive word. And it is,
Mm.
I like that word. I like the word that it has edginess to it.
Mm.
And the fact that a good counterbalance to that is you have to do all of that with a smile. And
Yeah.
uh, and that's kind of what wakes me up in the morning.
So would you say that actually this defiant optimism is a combination of courage, of smile, and boldness together to shape a new world? Because indeed, the two worlds together seems a bit contradictory.
No, exactly. And that's, I feel like, perhaps you do need that contradiction to make things happen,
Mm.
right?
Got you. Yeah.
And I think that conformity, is what got us to where we are today.
Mm.
And I think perhaps we do need that contradiction now
Yep.
to make us go forward.
Love it. So we're almost coming to an end, Doreen. I've got a last couple of questions, which are all about leadership, because in many ways, our discussion since the very beginning is all about the way you shape, you develop your own leadership, and the way you are sharing that, propagating that shared optimism to the world. As a leader, an entrepreneur, educator, you had to challenge traditional system all along your life, and you keep doing that. So, what does positive leadership mean to you, Doreen?
I do feel that positive leadership to me is thinking of the greater good and being able to make decisions which actually will not make people happy.
Hmm.
So, nothing in life comes for free. So there's always, give and take.
Yep.
And I think that, you know, as a leader, you just have to know that, there will be pushback. There will be, very many moments when you'll make some people unhappy, but you just have to forge ahead. Also, the
Hmm.
fact that I feel as a woman leader, it's something actually quite different. And what I still struggle with, to be very honest, Jean-Philippe, is
Yep.
as a woman leader, the world expects you to be a mother.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And I just find that very difficult and annoying, to be
Hmm.
very honest.
Hmm.
Because just because I'm a woman leader doesn't mean I have to always go and heal.
Yeah.
As a woman leader, just like any other leader, I have to sometimes destroy
Hmm.
and I have to sometimes rebuild. I have to actually do things which are difficult. And
Yeah.
and a lot of times I think for people it's very hard to take,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, I mean leadership is not easy, It's, if anyone says it is, I mean,
It,
perhaps I don't know how to be a leader, but it is not easy.
yeah. And so it's also something I love to discuss a bit, which is as you add and you keep having to tackle some tough moments in your life, a dream, tough challenges. Um, how do you stay optimist? How do you stay bold and resilient when faced again with setbacks? What are the routines you may have in your day-to-day life, in your week, or whatever you do? What are the practices you have to make you who you are and be that resilient and driving the change you want to see in the world?
Yeah, again, I mean, trust me, I have many low moments as well. So I think
Mm.
um, allowing yourself to have the low moments, and you have to kind of give yourself that luxury of having the low moment, and then being able to actually say, you know what, okay, now let's get up and get it done.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the thing is saying that you have the luxury of the low moment, you do not have the luxury of giving up.
Yes.
So, and I think that's something I always told myself.
Mm.
Yes, I mean, there are moments I'll cry, there are moments, I'll sit there and I'll just like, but then I know that, okay, let's get it out of the system. Now we have to kind of get back up because if I don't do it, who will?
Yes.
So
Love
I
it.
think, right. So I
Mhm.
think that's kind of, and I do see this as a privilege to have this opportunity to be able to do what we do and what I do. So what a great opportunity, what a great privilege, and how lucky am I to have that? So, you know,
Yeah.
that's what I tell myself.
That's a great advice. Now, my very last question, indeed, Doreen. These days, many people across the world feel powerless in the face of geopolitics, in face of issues like poverty, climate change, inequality. So, what advice would you give to young leaders, the new generation, right, who want to make a difference, a positive difference in the world, but don't know where to start?
Well, I would actually say the first and foremost with the young people, the only affirmation you need in life, and again, use the word affirmation because I feel so much of the young people's mind is now captured by social media. The
Mm,
only affirmation you need is from yourself.
mm,
So I think for them, that's the first step. If they can get towards that, I think they have actually done a lot in the journey of their own leadership and their journey of defiant optimism.
yeah.
Because if you actually need affirmation from other people, you actually are a rudderless ship. You will just go
Mm,
everywhere. Okay. So for me,
mm,
to be very, very, very honest, um, I don't care what
mm,
people say about me.
yeah.
What I care is the fact that I can face myself in the mirror.
Mm,
And that's the only thing I care about. So I think the thing is, for me, that is very important. And I think as a young person nowadays, you have too many people sharing too many things, how what they think you are.
yeah.
Um, let them, let them.
Yeah.
What's only important is what you think. So I think that's one. And I do feel that growing up now, young people, and it's very tough for them. They just have a lot of um, lot of different places that um, they get pulled into. So
Yeah.
I do think that it is also very, very important to have the ability to exercise concentration.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? Actually taking a book every
Mm,
day and being able to read it for 20 minutes
yeah.
without looking at your phone, without any interruption. And I think that that sheer practice of focus and
Hmm.
concentration is frankly what is needed if you are going to actually pursue something which is very difficult. If you're going to pursue something where you're actually going to think about changing any system or ways or, you know. So I think again, and people may say that's meditation, whatever it is, but if you think
Yeah.
about it, all these practices
Mm,
are all about sort of getting in touch with yourself, Jean-Philippe. That's what it
right.
is.
Yeah.
And creating that center, right?
Yes. Yeah. I love
So
it, and it's actually during the very first foundation of positive psychology, which is one of the underpinnings of positive leadership, and it starts with me, then it goes to me and others, and it goes far beyond to me and the world. But if you don't start taking care of yourself, being self-aware, having some self-esteem, having a sense of mission in your life, there's not much you can do for others and for the world. So I think it reminds us of of the very necessary priority you have for taking care of yourself. Jordan, it's been an incredible discussion, inspiring talk we had together today. And if I'm picking some of your words, I would say, well, if you affirm yourself, if you become a defiant optimist, then you'll be able probably to be the change you want to see in the world, just using, of course, a well-known quote.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I want to thank you so much again, Durreen, for the time. Your work is truly reshaping the financial world and proving that the capital markets can drive a positive change. To our listeners, if you found this episode inspiring, please don't forget to share it. And of course, I would always welcome a 5-star review and your comments as well to do better. And subscribe to the Positive Leadership Podcast. Until next time, stay inspired and lead with purpose. Thank you so much again, Durreen.
Thank you,
keep
Jean-Philippe.
riding this wave of change.
I will. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Take care.